I'm from Local Futures, which is an international NGO, a pioneer in the new economy movement that works or has worked for about 40 years, promoting alternatives to the global consumer culture and economy. After what probably 2.5 centuries of increasing exploitative industrialization and 4 decades of intense growth without consideration for the planet, we are now seeing, finally, I think, a majority of people that recognize the fact that the well-being of people depends on the well-being of the planet. This is not something new. Human culture throughout human history has co-evolved in its natural environment, and so has their economies. Most ancient cultures lived within their means, thread lightly, and shared what they have. This is the opposite of what we have today. We've heard about it. The global growth economy that demands an ever-increasing production and growth in order to be successful. It's very much a sort of big business strategy, but it has been backed by government that have followed sorry, I'm just trying to find my words here, backed by government in a pursuit of progress through growth and increased incomes. The consumer culture is, or the growth economy is very much tied into the consumption, and we talk about being groomed to consume rather than it being human nature that dictates our consumption. Recent studies show that we've exposed to about 5,000 ads every single day that are encouraging us to buy corporate products. Many of those we don't need and we never wanted, we never imagined that we need them, but this is something we're exposed to every day. This has led very much to the global economy being a corporate economy. Out of the biggest economies in the world, 63% are corporate economies, not nation-states economies. So that means that a lot of the power, both the economic power but also the political power, is in private hands. And food is a very good example. It's something we need every day. And here, today, we have a situation where 10 corporations dominate own most of the industrial foods sold worldwide, be it in China or in Latin America or in Denmark. This has been made possible through a series of free trade treaties that has, it sounds good, it ensures the free movement of goods, services, but also businesses, so they can move around, shop around to wherever the conditions are most favorable. So, for example, they can move production to somewhere where you have low incomes, low standards, you don't have to look after the environment, and this has caused sort of a race to the bottom, where you are competing, companies are competing within this system to make the most money by cutting down standards in many cases. And it also has resulted in increased global trade through lots of incentives like export subsidies, because we want more growth. And parallel to that, to the global trade, we've also had an increase in global emissions. And at Local Future, we recently ran a campaign called Insane Trade to highlight the role with the increasing trade in the climate crisis, something that's very overlooked. And a lot of this is totally ridiculous trade, so that we import and export same amounts of the identical goods, not because they are out of season, because it's profitable, because you get export subsidies, for example. This is something you see in many parts of the world. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without some specific structural mechanisms, such as subsidies. According to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, we now give 500 billion in direct subsidies every year across the world to fossil fuel industries. If you calculate indirect subsidy, it's 5.2 trillion. Indirect subsidies, that can be like tax exemptions. It also includes some of the health effects that the fossil fuel industry has. For example, someone talked about health before. People get more asthma because the air is polluted and so forth. And subsidies to the global infrastructure, 36 trillion in a period of 14 years. That makes it possible. You've probably gone down to the shops and sometimes wondered why a product that has been produced 10,000 kilometers away is cheaper than the product around the corner, no? Or why conventional foods are cheaper than organic foods. Well, it's because we taxpayers have given a subsidy, have paid for it in a hidden way that makes it artificially cheap. No? So these are some of the things that we have to consider when we want to change. We also have to change the mechanisms that maintain the economy that we have. So another thing is the global economy is based on debt. Most people don't know this. Private banks make money when we go and borrow money, or when the business goes and borrow money, or when the nation state, the government, goes and borrow money. These figures appear on a computer. They become money as you borrow them. Only about 3% of all the money in circulation are actually coins and have some kind of backing, and they are the ones that are produced by the nation state. That means that there is no limit to, in a way, to growth or to exploitative production, because you don't have to prioritize. No? In the household economy, we have to look how much money do we have. Do we want to spend it on this or that? We don't have endless, limitless. Here we have endless, limitless possibility of getting more money as long as the bank thinks that you'll be able to pay it back. This is also part of the economy that we have, and it also makes us very prone to financial crisis and economic collapse, like the crisis we saw in 2008. And this economy has left the world both depleted and polluted. For example, plastic waste, we hear a lot about that. 2/3 of that is from single-use plastic, much of which is used to wrapping all these products that need to travel from over long distances. And it has also produced an economy of inequality, where now, at the latest figures, 26 people combined have the same wealth as the poorest half of this world's population. And the reason why these are attached up there, because when I started talking about this a few years ago, first it was 85, then it was 62, and now I looked again, and now it's 26. You could then ask, us in the more privileged part of the world that have a lot more things than we had like 50 years ago, are we happier? Well, according to the UK and US studies, they are not happier. Happiness peaked in the 1950s at a time where people had few comforts, no washing machine, no heating in the houses, but they had community. They had meaningful human relationships, and they felt secured and valued within their communities. Now, what characterizes a lot of the industrialized countries are widespread loneliness among older people, for example, and it's considered a real serious health threat. And also depression and anxiety, particularly amongst the young, both in the UK and US again, it has increased exponentially, and also in Korea and Japan. So what we advocate is that we need not just to twinkle and modify the economy as it is to make it, a bit more sustainable, a bit more green, that we need to shift in direction towards more local economies under democratic control at the national, regional, and local level, sort of place-based businesses operating within ecological limits. Basically, sort of in summary, we need to stop over-regulating and taxing the small and the local, which is what is happening now. For example, the small and the local independent business, they don't move around. They can't move to another country where you only pay 10% in tax, right? They can't move to another country where the salaries are lower. That is what you can with the deregulation for the big multinational businesses, exactly what they are doing. And I've added here a few of the particular policy changes that I think could help a very rapid shift. One is removing the subsidies to fossil fuels. That's pretty obvious, right? We shouldn't be burning fossil fuels. Why are we subsidizing it? It makes it more cheap, right? And in comparison, it makes human labor more expensive because that's highly taxed. End carbon trading. Carbon trading and offsets has only proven that it's creating more pollution because it means that businesses in the West can say, we will pollute more, we give some money for growing forests over there, and that's not working very well. Re-regulate trade so that we don't have trade just for the sake of profit. We don't have the ridiculous situation of the sort of redundant trade that I just mentioned. Reform banking is also something that, for example, the positive money movement is talking a lot about, where the production of money should be under the control of nation states. Fair taxation, so we don't have this situation where global business are paying no tax. I don't know if you heard about Amazon that pays about 0% in tax, and any local bookshop will be paying a whole lot more. And government procurement policies is also something that can help make rapid shifts in almost every society if the government procurement policies are used to buying local products and sustainable products. Another thing, when I'll shifting in here to the localization examples, is to reject GDP as a measure of progress. All that it measures is the movement of money, right? It doesn't matter if it's arms sales, it doesn't matter if there's an increase that everybody drinking bottled water because our water is polluted. All that gives a rise in GDP, no? So we need to adopt holistic measures of well-being. How can we measure progress in just purely transactional terms and not consider the health of the planet, the health of us, whether we are happy? And there are a whole lot of different indicators that have been developed across the world. Probably the best known one is the gross national happiness indicators from Bhutan. These things, these policy changes I mentioned, will allow us to redesign our societies around the principles of localization with well-being in mind. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be trading with other people, but it means that we should be considering producing for local needs first, regional, national, and then for export, and not the other way around. Right now, the local food movement is leading the way for a broader localization movement. It's very, very inspirational what's happening all over the world, where people are building up local food initiatives, buying directly from farmers, and supporting small, diverse, healthy production. as there's so many community-supported agriculture projects popping up all around the world where people buy directly from farmers, diverse human-scale production, local farmers' markets have increased exponentially, and shops that focus on buying local and regional food from organic or agroecological production. Farmers' markets, I want to highlight those because they really, really have increased all over the world. In places where they had disappeared altogether, been outcompeted by supermarkets, they're now coming back. And they have an amazing effect on community. For example, the studies that have shown that when you're in a farming market, you have 10 times more conversations than you would have if you're in a supermarket. It builds community, it builds trust. It's also really good for the local economy, because when you buy directly from farmers in a local area, the money recirculates. The farmer goes around, buys something somewhere else in a local shop. They will buy something else also locally, hire a service. If you go down to a supermarket chain, that money goes directly out. It leaks out of the local economy, no? And are probably used elsewhere for distant shareholders or to open up a new supermarket, no? The Feria Verde from Costa Rica, a friend of mine, helped start that, and their idea was that they were going to make the most beautiful market possible. There are lots of amazing photos from there that I couldn't include here, but they're all young people, and they also came from a bit of a design background. That's why they had sort of the beauty included. And it has been amazing, the effect. This is in San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. They have 2 markets a week, 3,000 consumers, 500 families with their main income from the market. They've got a participatory certification of organic produce. And it's made a world of a difference, apparently. It has changed people thinking around food. There's a lot of culture, there's music. It's creating a new culture. And for me, one of the most exciting things is that it has meant that the youth, the sons and daughters of the farmers, are now for the first time here saying, we want to farm as well, because they're seeing that there is a possibility of a dignified and meaningful livelihood. Consumer cooperatives are also a phenomenon in a lot of cities where groups of consumers link with groups of producers and buy directly from them without middlemen, to the benefit of both. There's one such in Copenhagen. They've got 3,000 members, and they buy organic and in-season food directly from local and regional producers. This food co-op, it was inspired by one in the US, which was inspired by the food co-op movement in Japan, which is very strong. And this has in turn inspired another 21 consumer co-ops in Denmark. So these things can spread really fast and have a big impact. The Real Food Store from Exeter is another example of community shops. This was 300 people that got together and crowdfunded between themselves to set up a shop, because there was nowhere for producers to sell, small producers to sell. They were excluded from the sort of supermarket retailing. And that has been going strong for, I think, about 10 years. And 70% of the food comes from the region, and 90% comes locally, which is about within 100 miles, I think they calculate. The importance, one of the big impacts of these local food systems is that they support small farmers. And small farmers are really the key to our food security, because they are actually the ones that feed them out. What we eat, 70% on an international scale, comes from small producers that are only producing on 1/4 of the farmland. You mentioned something like that too. They're also more productive if you compare it to sort of monoculture on an industrial scale when you look at per hectare. or per area of land, which means they need less land to produce more. In the EU, 20 countries have registered a higher rate of production per hectare on small farms compared to larger farms. And that's true in Africa and Latin America as well. And they are also the key to our agrodiversity. No? The biodiversity of our plants and animals is extremely important, of course, for the planet as a whole, but also for our survival. And they are the ones that are maintaining that. They are live seed banks. Local business alliances are also a very, very important phenomenon to strengthen local economies. The Business Alliance for Local Living Economies from California, I invite you to look at them. They're very interesting. They're businesses that get together. They make like directories of where you can buy local produce, local services. They educate politicians about the importance of local independent businesses compared to the global business, because they are paying the taxes, they are acting responsibly within their communities. They run buy local campaigns to encourage people to choose local and sustainable products and services. Totally Locally is a kind of like a toolkit that was developed in the UK but is now being used by many towns and groups across the world. They help promote a localization strategy for businesses. And they, for example, one of the things they've had a huge success with is asking people to just commit £5 or $5 a week to buying local. And they then, depending on where they are, calculate how much that means for the local economy in terms of a year. How am I doing? I'm still got a minute or two. Local finance and investment is another thing that is also a growing, God knows what, fossil fuels. Slow money for local food is a movement, a slow money movement in the US, where people make groups in different towns or areas. People that have a bit of money invest there, and it goes into helping people set up a community-supported agriculture scheme to make a cafe or something else. So it's all about strengthening healthy local food systems. Equity trusts are also interesting, where you set up a trust, you facilitate people that want to lend money to people. Groups that want to do common good projects can borrow money there at a very low interest rate. So some of the examples that I know of, for example, a group that got together and wanted to buy a house for it to be like a community house, or another group that got together to protect a forest that was going to be clear-felled and decided to band together, borrow some money, buy it, and it became in the community trust. Or the Re-Economy Initiative from Tot Ness in the UK, which is like one of the first was the first transition town, where every year they hold sort of a day, a festival where local young people in particular come and pitch their idea for a sustainable local business, and people can invest in it or can offer their help in many different ways. Of course, we will not have a new economy without a change in our energy system. I think it's clear for everybody that we need to switch to renewables. That may need different stages, like in Hamburg. The first thing, people there wanted to switch to renewable energy. They couldn't do it because the energy system had been privatized. It had been sold to the Swedish energy giant Vattenfall, that, for example, have nuclear energy reactors in different places. And people pushed from the button until they got a referendum, and people voted in favor of reclaiming public ownership, and the next step is then to switch to 100% renewable. A lot of things that we have to be aware of in the debate about renewable energy, that there is a tendency now for not to consider scale and ownership. So a lot of the renewable energy system are now being taken over basically by big business, and with no consideration to whether this should be a democratic energy and a democratic control. And so the tendency is to maintain the economic system that we have and just replace it with renewable energy. Where I have lived in Mexico, for example, there's a huge windmill farms that have been, I think, they've all been built with the help of EU funds by Danes and Spanish people. And the energy that is owned by a foreign corporation, I don't know who has it right now, it's all being exported to Guatemala. None of it is being used locally. It's being used to, for example, a bit like of a greenwash where sort of Walmart say, oh, we are buying renewable energy, therefore we are now sustainable. So it's not an easy debate. It's not just about shifting to renewable. It's also about who owns it and how it's being used. No? To end, we consider that some of the key actions for systemic change, the most important ones, one is connect, to change the I to a we. And I think this is already happening on quite a large scale now. We can't do it by ourselves, and it's not a personal problem. It's not about us as individuals or consumers. It is about changing a system that encourages both the wrong behavior and that also makes it impossible almost for businesses to do the right thing when they have to compete on the lowest common denominator to make more money. No? And by connecting, we both need to resist the kind of corporate globalization and renew on a local level at the same time. We can't just do one or the other. And above all, which is something I'll be talking about a bit later in a workshop, we have a need to educate ourselves and others about the global economy and its alternatives, because we were talking, some of us yesterday, that by painting all the problems and the negative pictures, it's people feel disempowered, feel we can't do anything, it's too much, it's too complicated. So we need to share both the narratives of a different, more inspiring story, but also the many examples of things that are already happening. And I find it very encouraging to see so many people in the streets asking for system change. And but there's also a danger that if we don't know, if we're not clear about the things that have to be changed, that nothing will happen, or that we'll be sidetracked yet again, as we have been for the last few decades, where many of us have been doing amazing work, but it has mainly been single-issue campaigning and the treating of symptoms. And we don't have any more time. So that's got to stop. Thank you.